Hi everyone, and welcome to part 5 of my introduction to Dart. In this video we will learn about control flow, closures and enumerations. So let's get started. In this video we are going to look at some primitives that are available in Dart to deal with control flow. And by control flow I mean any logic that we can use to express conditionals or to perform logic inside a loop. Dart supports a number of different control flow statements, and here we are going to look at the following: if and else, while loops, for loops, and switch statements. In addition to this, we will also talk about some operators that we can use to evaluate conditional expressions. Okay, so I can start a new pod like this, and I can clear my main function over here. And now we can start by looking at if and else statements. To do that, I want to write a function that takes an integer as an argument and prints whether the integer is an even or an odd number. So let's write this. This is going to be a void function. I'm going to call it print odd even, and then within brackets I'm going to pass an int value argument. In the body of the function I'm going to write the following: if space and then within brackets value and then modulo 2 equals 0 and then open and close curly braces. Okay, so let me explain how this works. First of all, we are using an if statement, and the way the if statement works is by evaluating a Boolean expression to check if it's true or false. And if the expression is true, then the code inside the curly braces will be executed. So in this case, the Boolean expression that we are evaluating is this one, and it is contained inside braces. So how does this expression work? Here we take the input value and we use this % symbol to calculate the modulo 2. So this first bit of code that I've selected here calculates the remainder of the division of value by 2. And the result of this is either 1 or 0. And then the result is compared with the integer value 0 by using this equality operator that I've written as equal equal. So this entire expression evaluates to true if value modulo 2 is equal to 0. And if this is true, it means that the value is an even number. So inside the brackets, I can type in print, and then within single quotes, $value, and then space is even, like this. Okay, so let's take this function for a ride. In the main function, I can type print odd even with a value of 4, like this. And if I run the code, then the console will say 4 is even. Then we can try this again with an odd number and use 5 instead. And if we run the code, this time nothing is printed to console. And this is because 5 is an odd number, but our function only prints numbers that are even. So it's time to update our function so that we can print odd numbers as well. So over here, I'm going to type in else and then open and close curly braces. And inside here, I can type print and then within single quotes, $value is odd, like this. And now if I run the code again, the console says that 5 is odd. And the way this works is that the code inside the else statement is executed if the Boolean condition evaluates to false. Okay, so let's continue on the next video. In the last video, we have seen how to use if and else statements. As a next step, I'm going to rewrite this function in a more concise way by introducing a new conditional operator. So I'm going to write some code first, and then I'm going to explain it. So over here, I can type in final type equals, and then within brackets, value modulo 2 equals 0. And then I'm going to have a question mark, and then within single quotes I can type even, and then I'm going to have a colon, and then within single quotes odd with a semicolon at the end. And on the next line I can print, and then within single quotes $value is $type, semicolon, and then I can remove the remaining lines. Okay, so what this code does is to declare a type variable and assign it with this expression that we can see on the right. The first part of the expression is the same as the condition that we had on the if statement previously. And then we have a question mark, a string, a colon, and then another string. And this combination of question mark and colon is known as a ternary operator. And this is because this expression is composed of three parts. On the left, we have a Boolean expression. In the middle, we have an expression that is executed if the Boolean expression is true. And on the right, we have an expression that is executed if the Boolean expression is false. So the result of all of this is that the type variable will contain either the even or odd string depending on the input value. And then the value and type are printed to console with string interpolation. We can get back to our main function, and to test that everything works, we could type in print odd even with a value of 6. And if we run the code, we see that 5 is odd and 6 is even. In summary, the ternary operator can be used to evaluate expressions in a more concise way, rather than using a full if and else statement. Okay, so let's continue on the next video. In this video, we are going to look at how we can run code inside a loop. In Dart, there are a couple of keywords that we can use to deal with loops, and these are known as the while and for loops. So let's create a new pod, and then we can start with an example. What we want to do is to write a function that we can use to calculate the sum of all values inside a list of integers. So this function will have an int return type. We're going to call it sum, and then it will take one input parameter, which is a list of integers named values, like this. And then we need to implement this function. And we're going to see a few different ways that we can do this. So I'm going to write some code and then I will explain it. So here it goes. Int I equals 0, and then int result equals 0, and then while open bracket I less than values dot length, and then inside curly braces I can type result plus equal values, and then within square brackets I semicolon, and then I plus plus, like this, and in the end I'm going to return result, like this. So how does this code work? Here we define a result variable which we use to add up all the values in our list. And to iterate on the list, we initialize an index variable called I. And then we use a while loop. This while statement takes a condition and executes the code inside the body while the condition is true. So what we do is to start with I equal 0, and then we compare I with the number of values in the list. Then we access the value of the list at the index I, and we add this to our result value with the plus equal operator. Finally, we increment I with the plus plus operator. And this guarantees that we will add all the values in the list, because I increments one by one until it reaches the length of the list. When this happens, the condition inside the while loop evaluates to false and we exit the loop. And the last thing that we do is to return the result. So let's see if this works. In the main method, I'm going to create a list by typing final values equals, and then within square brackets 1, 2, 3, 4, like this, and then print the sum of values, like this. And if I run the code, I can see that on the console I get the number 10, which is the correct result. Okay, so we have seen how to use the while loop, and let's continue on the next video. In the last video, we have seen how to find the sum of a list of numbers with a while loop. Now it's a good time to introduce an alternative loop called the for loop. So what we are going to do is to update this function to use a for loop rather than a while loop. So here it goes. Over here, I'm going to remove this declaration, and then I'm going to replace this while with for. And inside brackets, I can type int I equals 0, semicolon, and then I'm going to add a semicolon at the end of this condition, and then type I++ over here. And finally, I can remove this increment inside the body of the for loop. And this code is equivalent to the previous implementation that was using the while loop. So by using a for loop, we can move the initialization and the increment step in our loop inside the for statement itself. And as you can see, this results in code that is more concise. And if we run this code, we can see that the result doesn't change. Next, I'm going to show you a variant of the for loop that is even easier to use. So over here, I'm going to write for, and then within brackets, int value in values, and then within brackets, result plus equal value, like this. So by using the in keyword, we can iterate over all the values in our list, and we can access each value individually. And this means that all we have to do in the body is to add the value to the result variable. So with this change, I can remove the older loop, and if I run the code again, then the result doesn't change. Okay, so let's continue on the next video. In the last video, we have seen how we can use for loops to simplify our code. In this video, I'm going to take a short diversion from control flow statements because I want to show you a way to implement this function with even less code. So the code that I'm about to write is a bit less intuitive than what we have seen so far, but I want to present it anyway so that we can introduce a couple of more concepts. So I'm going to type in the code first, and then I can explain it. So here I'm going to type return, and then values dot fold, and then within brackets I'm going to type in 0, comma, and then brackets again, result, comma, value, and then arrow operator, result plus value, and then semicolon, like this. So this code that I've just written does exactly the same thing as the for loop that we have written over here, but with just one line of code. So let me explain this. The first thing that we do is to call values.fold, and fold is a method of the iterable class. So we can call it in our list because list implements iterable. So let's open up the documentation for the fold method. And as we can see here, the fold method reduces a collection to a single value by iteratively combining each element of the collection with an existing value. And it uses initial value as the initial value and then iterates through the elements and updates the value with each element using the combine function. So let's get back to Dartpad and break this down. Over here, we pass 0 as the initial value, and this is the same as the initialization value of our result variable over here. And then we have this syntax. So the documentation refers to this as a combine function. To be precise, this syntax defines a special function called a closure. So what is a closure? The way I like to think about it is that a closure is a function without a name. So in Dart, it is possible to pass functions or closures as parameters to other functions, such as the fold method over here. And this is because in Dart, functions are first-class citizens. So in this example, what we are doing is to define a closure which takes two parameters as an input, so result and value, and returns result plus value as an output. And we use the arrow operator to keep everything concise and in one line. So to use fold, all we have to do is to remember to pass in an initial value and a combine function that we can use to accumulate our values. Now, fold is just one of many methods that are available when working with iterable in Dart. And just so you know, fold is also known as a functional operator and is called reduce in other languages. And there is an entire area of programming known as functional programming, which uses functions and closures heavily. So I'm not going to talk more in detail about functional programming here, and all I wanted to do is to show you the fold method and talk about closures, so that you can see that there is another way of working with collections other than using for and while loops. And just to summarize what we have seen so far, we have started by implementing the sum function using a while loop. And then we have seen how to simplify this with a for loop. And we have even seen a variant of the for loop that doesn't work with indexes. And finally, we have introduced the fold method. And with this, we have been able to implement our sum function with just one line of code. Okay, so let's continue on the next video. In this video, we are going to look at a new construct in Dart, which is known as an enumeration. So, what is an enumeration? An enumeration, or enum, is a special kind of class that is used to represent a fixed number of constant values. So, to show you how this looks like, let me just clean this code. And then over here, I can define an enum by typing enum, and then I need to give it a name, for example, network error. And then I have a pair of curly braces, and inside here I could type in bad URL, comma, and then on a new line, timeout, and then resource not available, like this. And if I wanted, I could add some more cases in here, but for now, let's just use these three. Next, let me show you how we can use this. So I could define a function that we could use to print an error depending on the value of the network error. So to do that, I could type in void print error, and then I can pass an input parameter, which would be a network error, like this. And then inside here, I could type in if error equals network error dot bad URL. Then inside braces, I can print bad URL, and I can then use an else and write else if error equals network error dot timeout. Then in this case, I could print timeout. And finally, I could type in else if error equals network error dot resource not available. And here I could print resource not available, like this. And in my main error, I could type in print error and then pass in network error dot bad URL, like this. And if I run the code in my console, I'm going to see bad URL. So enumerations, or enums, are used when we have a finite set of values that we need to represent. And in this example, we can check the input error variable against each of the possible cases in our enumeration and execute some logic accordingly. Okay, so let's continue on the next video. In the last video, we talked about enumerations in Dart, and we have written a function to execute some logic depending on a value of a network error enum. To do this, we have used a sequence of if-else statements, and this works. However, there is a better control flow statement that we can use to deal with situations where we need to check multiple cases, and this is known as the switch statement. So what I'm going to do now is to rewrite this method by using a switch statement. So here I can add a new line and type switch, and then within brackets error, and then open and close curly brackets, and in here I can type in case network error dot bad URL, and then a column. And then in here, I'm going to borrow this line, which says bad URL, and paste it like this. And then I'm going to add a break statement like this. And to make this quicker, I'm just going to copy and paste these 3 lines and adjust accordingly. So the second one will say case network error.timeout, and in this case, I print timeout. And the third one is going to say resource not available, and I'm going to print resource not available like this. And with this, I can now remove the if and else chain. Okay, so the way switch works is by taking an expression as an input, and then for each case statement, it compares the input with the value provided. And the comparison takes place with the equality operator. And if the input matches the expression in the case statement, then the corresponding code is executed. So if we run this code again, we can see that the console prints bad URL once again. Now, as you can see, I've added a break statement in here. So what does this do? The break statement ensures that we stop executing the code inside the switch. So if I was to comment out the break statement on this line, we would get a compiler error telling us that the last statement of the case should be break, continue, rethrow, return, or throw. And the point of this is that we need to use any of these keywords at the end of a case block. So I'm not going to discuss this in more detail here, and if you want to find out more about how to use switch statements, you can read the documentation on this page. And one observation that I want to make is that switch statements work quite well with enums, as we have seen. So let's get back to Dartpad and we can continue on the next video. We have now come to the end of this introduction to the Dart language. And just to be clear, this was not a complete and extensive coverage of the Dart language. Instead, I have chosen to cover all the basics that we need, so that we can be confident when we start writing code with Flutter. There are some features of the Dart language that I have left out intentionally, such as error handling and support for asynchronous programming with futures and streams. We will cover these additional features as we go along with the Flutter course, and I will introduce them at the most appropriate time so that we can see how they are used in the right context. In any case, if you are interested in learning more about the Dart language, you can head over to dartlang.org, and here you can find a lot of great documentation explaining all the features of the language in detail. In particular, you can take a look at the Dart language tour. This page contains extensive information about Dart, and you can use it to explore the various features on this menu on the right. So I hope that you have enjoyed this introduction. This is the end of part 5. This introduction to Dart is a free sample of my upcoming Flutter course. So if you want to receive updates about my course, you can sign up on my website codingwithflutter.com, and you will receive a promotional code when the course goes live. I hope you have enjoyed this series on the Dart language, and I'll see you on the next video.